All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Max Rounds 30 podcast where there is no overtime. As per usual, I am joined by Coy from MTU Esports, Jeff from Dust2 US, and I am Jacob, and I cast video games. So, in 30 minutes, we'll be covering all of this week's North American CSGO content. And to start things out, we finally replaced Jeff's crappy webcam, and I also remember to start the timer because my brain is big. So yeah, Jeff finally doesn't look like a giant rainbow.
Look,
So that's
look,
kind
you
of
can
cool.
see the visual. You can see the entire visual spectrum instead of just 16 colors. I'm so happy.
It looks like a human. It's
I,
amazing.
I look like a human instead of a Mr. Potato Head. I'm so happy for me.
You're not just going to turn into the void at any given moment.
No, it's incredibly unlikely.
I mean, that did make for some good memes, but
Yeah,
you know, it is what it is. So we do have actually quite a bit of news to go over this week as far as
important news, in fact.
as far as North American match fixing goes. We actually had some pretty big stuff drop. Actually, was that on Friday?
Yes, Friday, April 2nd. I remember it was 4 days ago.
This guy's report.
I contributed to the I made the news all by myself.
He is the news.
I'm the center of the news. Yeah. So for those who are literally living under a rock, and for the 90 people who watch this show, if you somehow missed NACS news but you're committed enough to watch Max Rounds 30, I'm confused and I'm sorry for you because this is going to come to a big surprise. NA Matchfixing is in style, and we finally know who's wearing it. So I released a report this week about a recording that came to Dusty.us all the way back in let's say the end of 2020, and in it it's the Rebirth, now Choco Check roster at the time, consisting of 4-Pack, Reggie, Carson, and Reggie, 4-Pack, and Carson basically admitting to conspiring to throw a match, and the match didn't happen, but within the context of the video, they basically go through their plan of sharing a radar, having Shrek come in to make it look more like there's just internet issues, and then just conspire to throw the match. And so in the video, they talk about how they're working with potentially Vec and Jules, and now Vec and Jules, for their part, have a mixture of publicly and privately disputed those charges, but ultimately that hasn't mattered for them, as the duo have now been released from OCG. While on the flip side, Reggie has been released from Choco Check, everyone's favorite org that totally exists and isn't just a front for match fixing. But obviously, I've been working on this story for a really long time, and so it doesn't really come as a surprise to me. So I really want to know what you two think about it. Like, what were your reactions to it when it dropped?
I mean, immediately, my thoughts, I just the thing that really blew my mind the most is the fact that people are complicit in radar sharing. That was the thing to me that I was like, people are doing this, really? Like I can understand I can conceptually understand people going, let's throw a match for money, skins, or whatever, but also the fact that they're coming up with so many different ways to try and disguise it. I guess it makes sense that they're trying to be sneaky about doing federal crime, but that's just it blew my mind personally to see that they're going to such depths, and it makes it so much more of a slam dunk on these players now that they've it comes out and everybody's like, you're doing this is insane, this is actually you are conspiring to do this kind of terrible thing to this scene. So
yeah, definitely.
That was my first thought, and I'll let Coy go because I think he was opening his mouth before me.
Yeah, so it really surprised me that was also the way in which that they were choosing to fix the match as well, because it made it very clear that matches were being fixed even if not all 10 players were aware of it. And so it muddies the water really hard as to if teams are actually trying or not, because sometimes you might watch one game and be like, wow, they're absolutely trying their ass off, except for some reason something else is the case and they're not winning. And so it really just goes to show just how big of a gray area NACS is because of this problem.
Definitely. And I feel like it adds a layer of sophistication, and it adds a layer of plausible deniability, because theoretically when you're sharing radars, you could play you could play 25 rounds perfectly normal and then just, go completely ham with gamble stacks at the end. And I feel like most people wouldn't be super keen to that because, like let's say we have two teams and it's like 12, it's 12-12, and a couple of those rounds, one of the teams decides to gamble stack or just, do like a full send rush and it works or it doesn't work. You could say that's just mental pressure when we now know that that's a common tactic for match fixing. And the rumors are that like this is a pretty common tactic for match fixing, like Choco Check. I'm gonna give you guys a big shocker here. I don't think Choco Check are inventing new forms of match fixing. Like I don't think they're like pioneers in. I don't think they're allegedly, of course, pioneers in illicit behavior. But it is concerning that it is concerning now that we've peered behind the curtain and we see like what they're doing, because anytime you see a weird play now, until the ESIC report comes out, we can think to ourselves, was that a weird play because of secret information? And I think one other angle with it too is that with radar sharing, we kind of have to go with the aggressive perspective that everyone on both teams are guilty, or at least are passive observers. Because if your IGL keeps getting the gamble stack right, or they keep getting the gamble stack wrong like 100% of the time, or even if they are giving calls that like don't there's no logical reason to assume them, and you're just like, well, that's normal. Like I just don't feel like there can be anyone who's like 100% innocent in these sort of situations. Except I will say I am happy to, at least in this case, bring up the fact that we do know Saturn and Battery were not involved at all, which is something that I am incredibly happy to see. I'm sure, Koi, you're happy too, as I know you're part of the Saturn hype train, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's just like, oh, sorry, you can keep going if you had something else there.
And I think outside of this report, which I feel like was good because it finally satiated everyone's thirst for blood in the whole NA Matchfixing thing. But I think the most important thing about this is that because of our cooperation with USIC and the fact that we have been able to keep in communication, is they have announced this report is coming out in 10 to 20 days, hopefully. And I think that's much more important than our report, because we're finally going to have some degree of closure. But at the same time, it is kind of scary in the sense that we really don't know, outside of maybe a few top NA teams, who could be guilty, who could have done something years ago, because we do know the ESIC investigation is likely going to be pulling from as far back as 2017. So it's a strange time in NA right now.
Yeah, and like to add on to that too, it's like we're going to enter a period too once we're post this, because of course the FBI is involved. We're going to also be dealing with, we're going to have this entire section. This is going to draw out because, like they're going to go into, whether it be we see plea bargains come out for some of these cases, or like we're going to see a lot of legal action come out as a result of all of this. And that's going to be a whole nother thing. Cause like, of course you'll see these bans come out, but like, we're going to see like this period of time where they have to go through the American legal system, and whatever their respective country legal system for, their respective, the respective legislation, for example, in like AU. But it's, this is not going to be, because like you're right, we're going to get that relief of bans and stuff like that. But then the question then I think we're going to see, what if they, these cases do go to court, right? And they've got these charges filed and they put up their defense. We're also going to see the possibility of them fighting in court. And if they do come out the other end, and see how these TOs and other, how those bans are handled by the ESIC, I think it just opens up a whole new box of cards.
Well, this will be a talking point for probably, honestly, the cases of the FBI might outlast CSGO as an esport. Like, the implications of what's going on right now might, we might 5-6 years from now, we might still not have closure on some of these cases. But at the same time, I'm more focused on like the esports side of this, in the sense that E6 fans have much more relevance to our lives, because essentially when a player is banned by ESIC now, they do essentially stop existing in our lives. So they're in a jail of their own creation. So if the FBI wants to send them to real jail, also, more power to them. But finally, but luckily ESIC does have the power to just flip a switch and ban these guys, where they do have an option to appeal, but it's going to be much more quick than any FBI system, which is reassuring because this should be out before season 37. So like we're entering like a whole new world right now of what the ecosystem is going to look like.
Now, my other question bringing up, do you think that they're going to do anything with like these extra playoff spots, as far as having some of these these players and teams get suspended? Of course, it's a temporary. Currently, it's it's a temporary suspension until the SIC report does come out.
Yeah.
That's correct?
Yeah. So ESEA doesn't ever really bend on their rules for how they like to approach league spots working. So what we understand from talking with ESEA is that for Chaco Check, there are 3 players who aren't banned or eligible to fill the spot, and because they have all those subs riding their roster, I wouldn't be surprised if they do manage to field. Okay, so it kind of depends on if the ESEC reports comes out and more players get banned. But let's say it comes out maybe like a week after playoffs. So for Chaco Check, they should be fine to play because they can just field Phantom or Tropical or any of their other roster riders. For OCG, they're fucked. Like they're fucked because they fell for the classic ruse, the classic blunder, where you only have 5 players sitting on your roster and you don't have any riders, and they need at least 2 players to fill the spots. And I don't think ESEA is going to be like, sure, we just banned 2 of your players for match fixing. You guys are probably culpable too. Here, have 2 free additions during the roster lock. Like, in no universe does ESEA has almost never given an emergency roster transfer, and like someone's basically had to like die or go to the hospital for a. So I don't see them doing it because a team had 2 of their players put on suspension. Like, it's not going to happen like that.
So. Here's my question then. Do they, I'm not familiar enough with the rule book to know if this is even a written rule, but I mean, we've never really experienced this large scale of an issue, of course, so we are writing the rules as we speak right now, but how does Oceanus lose their spot, or does that spot just become an auto forfeit because they don't have enough players? Because that'd be the boring option. But I'd like to maybe see a promotion.
Thanks to Oceania, we do thanks to this exact same core of players have a precedent. When Russian Canadians forfeited playoffs last season, they did get to keep their spot because you have to gain a certain number of forfeits during the regular season to lose your spot, and that's the only really way you can lose a spot through ESEA's rules. Is just basically being marked dead. No, so playoffs shouldn't matter as long as they can bring 2 players from last season into the next season. They should be fine. And mind you, they have options. They have Castro, who's a former player. They have Yuz. They have they have 5 or more players they can bring into next season. And I mean, obviously, once again, disclaimer: everything depends on the bans, but they will, and them and Chaco Check will likely stay alive in some form. Whether they want to stay alive in that form, it's anyone's guess. Whether Oceanus even wants to continue sponsoring them is anyone's guess. But if you're looking at it purely through ESEA's like rulebook perspective, the roster should come into season 37 unless the situation happens where every single player is banned, leaving less than 2 players to hold the spot.
Yeah, so I guess then my question with that though pertains a little bit more to for this upcoming playoffs bracket.
Okay.
Do they? That's what I'm mainly wondering is, would they just keep that spot, and if they don't have enough players to play a match, they just forfeit that game, or do they get their spot? Does somebody get?
You would hope ESEA would do a little bit of legwork for once and be like, well, OCG, you can literally not play, so the next team below you. But ESEA has kind of had a bad habit of just kind of letting forfeits go through. But at the same time, this isn't like a situation where a team dies or a team doesn't have a full roster or the team decides not to play. Like, this is a high profile case, and I don't think it's a good look for ESEA to have just a suspected match fixing team just forfeit through playoffs and literally take more money and more opportunities out of a real team's pocket. So it's like, I think this might be one of those seasons where we see them actually replace a playoffs team in the interest of having like a full competition.
What's the team that might replace them? Isn't it?
So
is it
it would be the next. It would be the next one, and it would be the next one down the standing. So that should be because they're from Group A. So I think it should be GGPR.
GGPR, okay. Yeah, I'd like to see GGPR.
Which that's a fair fox. Like, that's a good squad. Like,
Yeah, honestly, if we actually saw GGPR like get their shot in playoffs, especially after they finally kind of climbed their way out of the hole that they dug themselves into,
Yeah.
when they were trying out Poison and like they kind of got beaten down for a couple of games, it'd be nice to see one of those two teams get a shot. I think, but. Do we have anything more on the match fixing before we scoot on? We are at the 15-minute mark.
Coy, I know you haven't really. Is there anything you want to add about this? Any thoughts or feelings? Like, what is this? As someone who is actually like a player involved in the scene, like, what is? Can you give us like some insight into the player perspective on this?
I mean, so
Like, what's the chatter you've heard
a
from the
lot of
players?
so in the grand scheme of things, a lot of people were pretty like aware of these bans, but it's really nice to see that there's actual concrete evidence and that action is being taken. I think that's probably the most underrated effect of all of this this article going out is the fact that now people understand that yes, this is real and yes, there are things happening behind the scenes. And so it's basically just, as much as it is sort of sad for the North American scene, it provides also a lot of hope that it's not dead. People do care, and things are going to get better.
Excellent. I think that's a great way to wrap up that section as we head off into our next one. So we've got a couple of more stories for us tonight to kind of deal with. Nothing super crazy. You got a couple things to discuss, but going into the next thing would be roster changes. So we do have some roster changes made by some teams that did not make it into playoffs. First off being Sherps to Rise.
So, for people, so it's Sherps to Rise in exchange of Caber, which at the surface looks like a pretty one-to-one trade. But the only thing I would say is incredibly interesting about this move is Sherps was on Imperium. Imperium got absolutely demolished this season. Despite being demolished, Sherps posted, I think, a 1.09 rating in 8 losses and 1 win. So the thing that like excites me about this move is if a player is playing so well while being demolished under a team that doesn't really look like it has a good system and a good setup, what does it look like if he's on a team that has a proper IGL and is able to and doesn't just feel like it's Sherps go kill? Like, what does it look like when he's on a team that can like function as a unit?
I think that this will be a really interesting roster move, just because Sukaber for the longest time has kind of been like, it feels like a jack of all trades, master of none sort of situation, where he's definitely good enough to compete against most teams, but he's not exactly going to have like a standout, super impressive performance doing it. Whereas Sherps, as you just mentioned, he was like the star player of Imperium, if you will, and so that team wasn't necessarily like built around Sherps to go kill things for the most part. He was kind of just playing his role, and so if he can just continue to just play his role and just fit into the system that Rise have already, like, sky's the limit, I think.
Yeah,
I
they
think it is an
definitely.
ultimately better move, though. I really do.
I mean, yeah, because also we do know like Caber is kind of a journeyman player, and he doesn't.
Yeah.
I feel like, and I don't think he really had a future on the team because, like he told me for the article, was there's some like unbridgeable differences, which it seems like a diplomatic way of saying like I don't like the team setup, and the team said too bad. So there wasn't really a reality in which Caber can stay on. But so I mean, yeah, overall this is a fair move.
Yeah, I'd agree. I like when it comes to Rise, like I felt like they were just like almost there. They came into the season and they were looking like they might have been like a pretty good threat to a lot of teams. But then they kind of like took that initial loss against GGPR and like they just kind of always played second fiddle to GGPR this season. It kind of felt like. So I think this is kind of might be the opportunity for them to kind of kick their way into maybe that next echelon of the premier season. So next up, I believe we have what was it? Secret Club minus Jitter, and then I believe plus Infinite. So
Well, not quite plus Infinite. Let's
yes.
temper our excitement here. It's they got rid of Jitter, which seems like it was a move that was meant that like 100% was gonna happen because he ghosted them, and you don't ghost a team and have a future with them. Whereas apparently going on vacation, perfectly acceptable. Ghosting, get the fuck out. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So Yeah, but I mean, so I actually had I was graced by the ability to stream the Mythic Spring Cup today, and I did cast the Secret Club versus Pain game. Now, from what I saw, it really doesn't make that big of a difference. The Secret Club, they got absolutely demolished by Pain. They only won on Nuke. They won a single gun round. And they only had 5 rounds against Pain, which, I mean, Pain's a really strong team, but like Infinite was not a standout on that squad at all. And
A
then
a Valorant player does not make a good CS:GO player. Apparently, like
I don't know.
Sad trombone.
I think that, again, I think this roster move is going to be underwhelming at the beginning, and that's only because Secret Club doesn't have an understanding as to like what kind of team they are yet, right?
They don't even have a fit right now. Yeah,
exactly. Like I don't think that's really fair to necessarily knock Infinite for playing one way or another when, as a core, the team doesn't know how to play half the time. And Infinite's been like, one of those like, quote unquote like prospective players, similar to like how Grim was back in the day. I think
that chip has kind of sailed a bit, though. I mean,
I think it has, but he definitely still has the potential to just outright carry games. But it's always with teammates that understand their roles and how they're supposed to play. And so I don't really want to knock Secret Club too hard here until they actually have time to figure out what they're doing.
I do want to make a point of order, though, is that Infinite isn't a permanent fifth. What they told us is that he will just be standing in for this event. He said sort of evasively that he's looking at all of his options. And, CSGO CSGO has to be one of those options because, you don't accidentally play for 2 different teams in the span of a month and be like, nope, I'm still 100% committed to Valorant, but I'm just here and just hanging out. Like,
so did he like kind of officially step back from Recon 5 then? Because I thought he was supposed to go there at some point.
He stepped down because he had the post-surgery complications. But mind you, Recon 5 still had a roster ad, and that's what they did. They added Saturn. So Infinite just doesn't show up to the team. Like, he didn't show up in an emergency. They could have added Saturn anytime they wanted. So I'm almost thinking, like, maybe he's interested in trying CSGO again. And, could it be possible he's, mind you, he hasn't played for NRG in months now. He's still officially contracted to them, but they've kind of moved on without him in Valorant. So if he's looking at his future, perhaps he's looking at maybe CSGO as part of that future, because we do know there's a lot of skill transfer. I mean, he was a CSGO player a year ago, so maybe there's going to be the return. I don't know. What do we think about, where does Jitter go from here? I'm leaning towards nowhere. Like, I'm leaning to like take a long time off because I don't really think he has like street credit. I don't think he has street cred. I think he has a bad rep from his ghosting, and I don't think he really has any inroads with any teams that still exist.
I think he does. I think depending on what teams we see win out in relegation potentially, or what sort of like our remnant teams are, I definitely think he could have a spot there, because keep in mind, a lot of those teams that come in, they're not so much looking at the history of a player as to what performance they offer then and there. And Jitter has a pretty, high skill ceiling in the grand scheme of things. So I could see him finding a way onto one of those rosters. Does he necessarily have an offer right now? Probably not. Most people probably aren't considering him to be like their top roster replacement. But I think he will still have a spot in Premier next season somehow.
What do we do? How do we feel about Secret Club? Like, I almost feel like, for me personally, I'm no longer like in Secret Club mania a bit. Yeah, Jacob, you got something to say?
I was just gonna say they're in a transitionary period. I don't think.
Oh, definitely. But
I don't think we can judge them right now. We need to see what their permanent fifth looks like, because they had flashes where they looked really good in like today's series, even playing with Infinite. But like it was never quite there. Like they looked amazing on Deagles. Like they were hitting like all sorts of crazy shots, and they almost won like 5 ecos. But it's they're in a period where they probably don't have that confidence, and they don't have that, they don't have everything together in order to really show themselves as Secret Club right now. So I think they're just testing their options, and they're going to find their way into what this team looks like for next season. So I don't think we can judge them yet, but I think we can take a look at it and say, this might be where they could improve roles, et cetera, that kind of stuff.
I do feel like their fifth kind of needs to be a bit dynamite, though, for me to get excited again, because while I've always liked the core of this team, I do feel like that they are missing sort of like an oomph factor that
missing Clasia.
Yeah, I'm. This team's been kind of down bad since they lost Clasia, so it's like I think they need something like him, but maybe without like the interpersonal issues. Like I think they just need a strong fragger, but I also think they need like something like an experienced player, like maybe a DJ who's out on the market, someone who can work with Wolfie and bring like a foundation to this roster and help them rebuild instead of it being Wolfie's daycare.
So taking our 5-minute mark here off of the Wolfie's daycare comment, we've got a couple of things to kind of chat about here. We do have the Cash Cup results. We also had High Coast winning their second, so they are now banned from the next
They're
Cash
now
Cup.
banned for 1 week,
Yeah, so they won't be in the next Cash Cup, but they have won 2 in a row. So they actually won their last one over Bad News Bears, which was a pretty good victory for them. So I think that's good progress for them.
They made Bad News Bears look mortal. Like they slapped Janji around pretty good, and teams don't really slap Janji around. Like Janji's the one who does the big meaty slapping. Like he's the one who will take on like most top NA teams and put up like a 1.6 rating. So like this is exciting for them. Like I think they finally hit their stride. The additions of Modem. You don't think they've hit their stride?
No. I was just going to say, I think this rolls really well into our next topic with our last 4 minutes here. We were just going to like talk about, who's really on the top of NA right now. And I think talking about High Coast right now, they've been like hitting some major strides, and I'm really liking where they're going. But at the same time, we also have to ask the question, because, Extra Salt is in Europe.
They're visiting sunny Serbia, so we're not going to see those guys for a while.
And Pain is in advance, so it's down to these remaining 3 teams really for this. I mean, realistically, it's down to these remaining 3 teams for who gets that Pro League spot, unless we see something out of Extra Salt, unless they come back and somehow do that. I don't know how that's going to happen.
If they just play with 200 ping and then just like European wide swing everyone, and like
if they win off 200 ping, I will get an Extra Salt tattoo.
All right.
You heard it here on the.
You heard it here first. He will get the sex tattoo.
I like it.
I'm totally gonna regret saying this. Please do not play from
No, OC's just gonna jiggle with the op and just win. So I think we're pretty solid in our belief that it's probably a battle between High Coast and Bad News Bears for the second position in NA of domestic rosters. So that kind of raises the question, I think, what we can talk about for the last 2 minutes is, where the fuck is Triumph? What's going on? What do we think? Is it roster move time?
I don't think it's roster move time. I think it's like, I almost want to say that they're still in a rut like Secret Club is in terms of their transitionary period, except that for Triumph, they just perform at a slightly higher level while in that transitionary period.
Yeah.
So not quite as apparent. So like we expect them to be really good because, hey, they can beat, Secret Club, or they can beat Recon 5 or something like that. But when in reality, they're still, immensely crippled from their actual potential because they haven't had, 2 weeks off to just sit down and focus on their individual problems.
When do you think so? I want to say one thing is that obviously I feel good in saying this once again. Cynic's been absolutely dynamite, and he is the truth, and he is the future. But let's say, when do we need to have the Triumph talk? Like, how much more time do you think we should give them before we say, like, maybe it's time for a roster change?
Halfway through next season.
Halfway through next season?
Halfway through. Yeah.
What's a reasonable metric, do you think, to set for them with a minute left? Like, what do we want to see from them by that point?
I want them to be banned from Cash Cups.
Get 1 ban? I think that's definitely fair, because, we do. I mean, for God's sake, they do have, Cooper, who is a legitimate tier 2 NA Pro. They have Sheikh Zula, who's one of our best IGLs, and they have Cynic, who is the truth. And that 3 alone should be enough to, put, to battle to the death with Bad News Bears. So I think that's a completely reasonable expectation for them.
Yeah, I think that this same kind of deal. My expectation is that they are able to take series against Bad News Bears and maybe even Extra Salt if they're playing back in NA at any point. Like, if they can start to trade with those teams instead of every single time losing those series, then I think that we're going to be in a really good spot, because they had that honeymoon period with Cynic, and then it kind of started to kind of bow down after that. So I
Definitely,
think
yeah. I think we need to start seeing, because it is kind of the Cynic show a little bit right now. Like it's either Cynic top frags or we see Sheikh Zilla have a really good game. But I think we need to see like the system come in place, and I'm kind of hoping that if they don't do well in playoffs, I'm kind of hoping that the break between seasons will allow them like settle in a bit more.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, we have about 5 seconds left, and we will be talking about playoffs next week, so be sure to tune in for that. But now it is time for us to end the show. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in, either via the audio podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, and RSS for those freaks, and as well as on YouTube for the people who like to look at our pretty faces. So thank you, everybody, and good night.
Good night.